The Chris Johnston Show.
Let's go!
Your number one destination for a behind-the-scenes look at the game of hockey.
Is this thing on?
Here's NHL insider Chris Johnston and host Julian McKenzie.
CJ, cutdown day is behind us. The rosters are set across the NHL. We are days away from the rest of the NHL getting themselves going. We know the Sabres and the Devils have already done so out in Czechia, but now it's time for the rest of the league to get going. Let's try to make sense of all these different roster moves that went down yesterday. What's the biggest one that caught your eye? And it's okay if it's the Leafs, because that's the team you do cover every day.
Well, I got to say it's probably a top 3 uncomfortable day for players around the league. Obviously, trade deadline's probably the big daddy top one that just a lot of players wake up that morning not sure what's going to happen to them, to their families. It's in season, but we saw a massive number of players on waivers. A couple trades even being made, and so the one move that stands out, tough to say. I mean, I think I look at the series of moves in Vancouver, where they're able to trade Tucker Pullman's contract to Colorado. They get Eric Brandstrom back. They extend Niels Höglander to a deal. Looks like they're one of those teams now that's not going to have to operate this season in long-term injured reserve, which, if you're not interested in knowing the finer parts of the cap, what it means is they're going to be in a much better position as the season goes along to make trades or add players, I guess, on the waiver wire or any other way. They're going to have more flexibility than they would otherwise. And that's a small trend. It's not a big capital T trend yet, but because the cap has gone up, we've seen more and more teams that are trying to win the Stanley Cup this year, be able to preserve that flexibility. And so, those moves stood out to me. And then of course, Toronto. I mean, the Leafs had a lot going on. They signed 2 players that were in camp officially on PTOs. The Max Pacioretty signing, I don't think took anyone by surprise, given that it was expected that his was a PTO with a little bit more of a promise of a job. But Steven Lawrence as well signs with the Leafs. They put Matt Murray on waivers. They shuffle some things around. They got some injured players. I mean, it's a great day for the capologists out there to show their mettle, because in the Leafs case, they are an LTIR, but they're there by $1, meaning they absolutely maximized. While it's not great to be an LTIR, you'd rather not if you could avoid it. They maximize the pool of money they'll have as the season goes along, and that's because Brandon Pridham, who works for them, is one of the best at what he does.
Absolutely. What about some of the September sweethearts that you've mentioned in terms of young players trying to crack lineups? I think of guys like Samuel Honzek in Calgary, who took a lot of people by surprise in training camp with the way that he played. And he's going to start the season on a roster, whereas guys like Jacob Pelletier, who we've talked about on the show, he'll be down in the American Hockey League. But Cole Schwindt, another young player in that system, claimed by the Vegas Golden Knights. Carter Yakemchuk's another example out in Ottawa. He got sent to the Calgary Hitmen yesterday. There's a few of those September sweethearts.
Yeah, and ultimately not many of them are sticking around, right? I mean, 2 draft picks from this most recent draft, Macklin Celebrini in San Jose and Judd Lutchenko in Philadelphia, are the only 2 that were drafted in June that are even just starting the year on rosters. Obviously, there's a few more teenagers, as you mentioned, and that is the reality. I mean, we get to the end of camp and a lot of some of those storylines for the most part fade away, but not all of them, of course. Some of those players still did end up sticking with their teams. And so, maybe in Calgary, someone like Honzek could become a story for a team turning things over, right? I mean, they want to create that internal competition. You see Pelletier clear waivers. He signed a 2-way contract. I mean, it's kind of been pointing in this direction. I know in the market, there seems, just because he has that first round pick branding, I understand why fans and maybe some members of the media might think like, oh, they can't waive this guy. But, when they sign him to a 2-way deal, it's sort of to me, at that stage of his career, it's a sign that they're seeing him as an in-betweener and they're not sure which way it's going to go. And as camp ends, he ends up down with the Wranglers. So, it's a funny time of year where, we look at all these teams on the opening night roster and, I know what's going to come next. We're going to want cup picks and this and that. But I mean, it's really, the reality is it's like the first step in a series of many steps the teams will take. And, where every team starts isn't where they end up. And that includes the camp, the September Sweethearts. So that's part of the story of every season for teams, but very few of those players manage to break through and make an impact. And, when the real games get going here, I mean, it's, what happened in training camp will quickly be forgotten in terms of, the preseason anyway.
The cup picks are later in the show, CJ, by the way. I don't
have an exciting one this year.
I mean, it could be exciting enough for the rest of our viewers. I mean, what you know what? Don't spoil it. Save it. This is a tease.
What a tease it is, but I'm like, I don't even have an exciting one. Like, don't even stick around, because what I'm about to tell you, you've heard somewhere else.
That's not true. One player we should mention from that cluster of September Sweethearts, and our good friend Arpin Basu, forever a friend of the show, wrote a really cool article on him for The Athletic. Lane Hutson. So many Canadiens fans have been enamored with his play at the back end, and he makes the team out of camp. What did you think of that story?
Well, it's not a surprise to me he made the team, but I think he's certainly one of the players that's going to be pretty intriguing to watch this season. An undersized defenseman. I think he's 160 pounds, give or take. Never know how reliable those height and weight, listings are, but he's a very slight guy. Maybe in the model of kind of a Quinn Hughes, if you're looking for just an obvious example of a player that, obviously in the last number of years in Vancouver has become their captain, but, plays a position in a unique way and has become such an effective part of, what Vancouver does. What's intriguing about Hutson is a couple things. He has that skill. He's coming into a team that badly needs it, in a fan base that's clamoring for it. But it also sounds like he's going to get a lot of opportunity through even, learning, essentially, through making mistakes. I suppose the one benefit if you're entering the league on a team like the Canadiens is I think they can be more patient with him than if he was being introduced on a blue line, where the team is trying to win the Stanley Cup this season. And the stakes were maybe a little bit different. It's not to say, I'm not by any means suggesting Montreal doesn't care if they win or lose, but I think that there's more of an opportunity to take a bigger picture view of his personal development through their season. And, I think this guy is going to be fun to watch. I mean, I don't know how deep we're going on the predictions, but I'll say this, if we're doing a Calder Trophy prediction, I think Lane Hutson's the kind of player that has to be in that conversation. I'm not saying that, there's Matvei Michkov and, maybe Macklin Celebrini, Stankoven in Dallas. I mean, there's other places we could go when we're identifying the player most likely to be Rookie of the Year. But, I think Hutson's got a real shot at it because of the way he plays. He's going to produce points as long as he's in the lineup regularly. Just has those kind of offensive gifts. I can't remember which Canadiens teammate. I saw a clip on TV this week, and he's like, my hips just hurt watching him move out there. Like, I thought it's a good visual for how Hutson plays. He's so elusive and really can skate in an effective way along the blue line, move the puck. And so, I think, there is a little bit of excitement on the horizon in Montreal. Tough preseason, obviously losing Reinbacher and Patrick Laine to significant injuries, but, a player like Hutson will help, I think, ease the pain. You've got Oliver Kapanen made their team as well as centerman. It's funny, I actually wrote a story on him. He was playing for Finland at the World Hockey Championship in May. Mm-hmm. And if you recognize the last name, yes, it's Finland's first family of hockey. He's a third generation, player that played for the national team. Basically, the grandfather he's cousins of Kasperi Kapanen. His uncle is Sami Kapanen, who's Kasperi's dad, and Sammy's dad, Hannu, is actually in the Finnish Hockey Hall of Fame. So it's a pretty famous hockey bloodline over there, and really strong two-way player. I think the plan was to send him back to Sweden to play actually in the SHL. Had he not made the Canadiens, but he's sticking around too. So, as I said, not all the September Sweethearts fade away. Some of them will be here all year, and I think Hutson and Kapanen are two guys that should have Canadiens fans feeling pretty good.
All right. And what about Easton Cowan for the Toronto Maple Leafs? He gets sent back to the London Knights of the OHL. We've noticed a lot of fans over the last few weeks basically ask for your opinion on Easton through Ask CJ. So what are your thoughts on that story?
It's a tough one. I mean, Easton's 19. He won the OHL MVP and playoff MVP last year while playing in London. So, naturally, I think it's fair to conclude, well, what more does he have to prove? Well, unfortunately or fortunately, depending how you view these things, there is an NHL CHL transfer agreement. Doesn't allow someone in Easton's case to play anywhere but the Ontario Hockey League if he's not in the NHL. And, he just didn't make the decision hard on Leafs brass. It's not that he had an awful camp, but he didn't have a break the doors down camp, right? He wasn't making an impact in the games where you're like, wow, I mean, how can they live without this guy? And I think the reality is, Cowan's on a team that obviously has, first of all, a lot of forward depth. I think the Leafs this year are entering the season with far more depth at the sort of bottom end of their forward core than they had last season. You've got Bobby McMahon, for example. I think he had 11, 12 goals last season. He's already starting the year as a healthy scratch when they play Wednesday in Montreal to start their year. And then that doesn't include an injury to a guy like Calle Yarncroke, who's obviously been part of their lineup. So, the Leafs are running 14 or 15 forwards deep at this point, and Cowan just didn't get his way in the mix. And I imagine there's some disappointment for him. Not that he minds going back to London where he's had all kinds of success. It's just that, he was pretty highly hyped through September and the rookie tournament and was thought to have a chance at the lineup, but it just didn't materialize. And so, it's, you hope that he can get the positives in his mind. Obviously he's going to go to a great program in the OHL, a place where he's comfortable. I imagine he's going to put up like 1.5 points just by showing up for the games because he's already shown himself to be a cut above a lot of players at that level. He's going to get a chance to play for Canada at the World Junior Championship in December. And, next year, he'll be a pro one way or another. Next year he'll come to camp with a chance to be a Maple Leaf, or he would go and play for the Toronto Marlies. So, it just didn't force management's hands or the coaching staff's hands. But, I don't think it's not a setback because he is so young and because you have to be realistic about the roster you're trying to crack here. I mean, until Nick Robertson scored 5 goals in the preseason, there was at least some question about where he fit on this team. And, Nick's a few years beyond his OHL career. There's a progression, especially when you're trying to crack a roster with the players the Leafs have. And so, for Cowan, I think that the best thing he could do is just go down there and try to enjoy each day because, next fall will come sooner than he thinks. I'll put it that way.
Not to jump all over the place, but I realize we haven't really touched on Nick Robertson's preseason much. What a preseason for him. It started with us wondering if he still wanted to be on this team, and now you can't see this Leafs roster without him, at least with the way that he's been playing in preseason.
Yeah, and it doesn't stop here, right? That's kind of my view of it. But that's the kind of preseason when your standing isn't secured entering camp. Like if you're not named Austin Matthews or Mitch Marner, I mean, you need to have that kind of performance in order to earn the spot in the lineup that he has. And essentially, I guess he's bumped a Bobby McMahon down. Max Pacioretty signing obviously does that. Those two right now, Robertson and Pacioretty, are due to start on a third line with Pontus Holmberg. The fourth line, I think they're trying to do some different things with. That's where you've got Lorentz and Kampf and Reeves. But for Robertson, it wasn't just that he scored 5 goals. He killed penalties, which is not something he's done a lot in the NHL in the past, a little bit last season. I think he showed sort of a determination to win puck battles along the wall, which, is always going to be a bit of I don't want to call it a struggle, but a battle for someone like him. He's a smaller player. So he's got to find a way to be able to be effective in that position, even though he's giving up size to a lot of the defensemen or wingers he's going to find himself up against in those situations. But, he really caught the new coach's eye. And that so much of our conversation, whenever we touched on this in our summer episodes early in September before he signed, was, I understand his frustration with the lack of opportunity he's perceived to have been had, but there is a new opportunity now. There's a new coach, right? And Craig Berube has put his own little stamp on the Leafs here. I mean, Timothy Liljegren was a top 4 defenseman for the Leafs last year. He might be 8th right now on their depth chart based on what we've seen in training camp. I mean, he makes $3 million, but he's right at the bottom of the order. I mean, we saw Connor Timmins leapfrog him. Looked like Philippe Myers may have leapfrogged him. 2 right-hand shot players that may play ahead of him until there's injuries or something else that forces Liljegren into the lineup. As I mentioned already, McMahon has been supplanted. I don't think that's cause for huge alarm. He finished last year with an injury, but the point is there has been a shakeup in the bottom half of the Leafs roster. And I think a lot of it is a new coach viewing things in a different way and maybe not having allegiances where, the previous coach would have had relationships or preconceived notions. I mean, this is all natural, but it was a fresh slate for these guys. And Nick Robertson took his fresh slate and has done great with it. But that being said, the Leafs play Wednesday, Thursday, Julian, to start the year in Montreal and then in New Jersey against old friend Sheldon Keefe on the other bench. If Robertson has 2 tough games, I mean, maybe by Saturday night, we're talking about a lineup shuffle. I mean, that's the reality of the league. Is I think he's still going to have to fight for his position and keep earning Craig Berube's trust. But I mean, he's done everything you could ask for through that training camp. Probably Philippe Myers making the opening night roster would be the biggest surprise for the Leafs, I would say. Like if we had that discussion on September 18th, I'm not sure I would have entertained the conversation for too long. I just wouldn't have thought it was something that was going to happen. But I'd say Robertson had the best individual performance by someone who had to do something to get the attention of the team and management and coaching staff. So, credit to him for that. And here we go again in Leafs land. It's going to be an interesting regular season on all kinds of fronts. I mean, I think that you have this season starting with Joseph Woll and Anthony Stolarz splitting the net. Neither of them has played 30 games in one regular season in the NHL. I mean, if you just do the math, if they split the starts, they each have to play 41. So it was actually very important, in my view, that they got Matt Murray through waivers because, well, I realize Matt Murray at this point in his career, you don't know what he is. He missed almost all of last season after bilateral hip surgery. What you do know is he's played a lot of NHL games, and he's played even 2 seasons ago in Toronto, he played as a league average goalie. Like he was still at least league average. The issue 2 years ago was he wasn't healthy. They couldn't rely on him for 3 or 4 starts in a row. He kept having to have delays with time off. He hopes he's dealt with that, but they put a signing bonus in his contract that I think helped get him through waivers. And much like Martin Jones last year, like I played this game with our colleague Jonas Siegel just over text. I said, Matt Murray over or under 10.5 starts this season, or appearances, I think I said. And he said hard over. Jonas said hard over. And it's hard to say because Joseph Woll obviously just has had his own injury struggles. Anthony Stolarz has been he's been a very effective backup. You look at his last few years, but can he handle more of a workload? I mean, I think you're going to see at least 3 goalies play games, like a significant number of games for the Leafs. And then it's the Leafs. There's going to be some other drama or something that goes on through this season.
Hard over. I mean, is Dennis Hildeby getting starts this year too? I mean, I don't know if we should limit to just 3 if it gets to that point.
I think obviously it's possible he could. Last year he was called up a couple times and didn't get into a game. It's natural progression. I think a lot of it will be how he plays, but you don't. It's not. This is no shade of Dennis Hildeby, who, if you're not following the Leafs day to day, he's a 6'5" goaltender from Sweden. He won a championship at a young age over there. There's a lot of promise for him, and I do think he'll be in the mix in the years down the road for the Leafs as more of an option. But you want some certainty. And I'll say this about Matt Murray because there's been a lot going on the CJ Show chat about him lately. The man is 30 years old. Joseph Woll is 26. He's only 4 years older than Woll. And I grant, who knows after hip surgery what will be, but what his ceiling prior to an injury was incredibly high. And while I would not predict you're going to see him get back to the form he's had, just because I think age and injuries will probably preclude him from doing that. Even if he gets partway there, you've probably got a goaltender next year. I don't know if it'll be in Toronto who's going to have a job. I mean, look at the goalies around the league right now. Like James Reimer, bless him, just picked up on waivers by Anaheim. Like James Reimer's in his late 30s, and he's still got a guaranteed job in the NHL right now. And there's a number of other players that I'm just saying that play on and on and on and on and on. And I can just see, maybe I'm being a little biased here. I had a good chat with Matt Murray the other day, but I was like, man, this guy is in the best place I can recall seeing him. Like you could feel it from him. And it wouldn't surprise me in the least if he goes on and now has a second chapter of his career that again, not predicting the heights. The guy entered the league by winning 2 cups at age 23. So I'm not saying he's going to do that, but I could see him having a totally serviceable career because he seems very driven. He seems optimistic that the hip procedure has really not only just fixed his hips, but he said has made the rest of his body feel well in areas he might've been compensating for that issue. And he's only 30. Let's not put him out to pasture yet. So anyway, that's a lot of thoughts thrown together on a Nick Robertson question on the Leafs, but didn't end up being I think it's an interesting camp. I think it ends up being kind of an interesting camp. Like the defense was the biggest change for this team. And, I don't know what happens with Timothy Liljegren. I mean, the Leafs are starting the year in LTIR, as I mentioned, but once players like Järnkrok get healthy, or maybe Jani Hakanpää, there's the possibility they're going to be faced with some roster decisions that could, include a trade or a notable player on waivers. And right now, Liljegren's scrapping for a spot, and he's only 26 and just signed a $3 million per year deal. So buckle up.
That was an excellent Leafs corner off of
summation. Yeah, you didn't even tee up Leafs corner. I just jumped into it.
That's amazing. Love it. Anything else about the Leafs before I move on? Because I want to just lightly mention Carter Yakemchuk. I know I kind of did, but I'll go in a little bit more on his situation too.
No, I don't think so. I mean, Leafs Canadians on Wednesday night. That'll be a fun game. You must
be excited. Oh, I bet. Yes.
Yeah, it's in Montreal. I'm not on the road, but I'm excited. I'm excited for the start of the season. Honestly, I was excited watching the games in Prague. Like, I know some people are down on that. I watched a good chunk of both those games over the weekend. Like, it's just exciting to have real hockey back. We're recording Tuesday morning this week. Shout out Julian for your move across the country. But tonight, hopefully, I mean, I'm no weather expert, but I've been following this hurricane news, and it seems very concerning for people in Florida. Yes. So stay safe if you're down there. But
Absolutely.
Boston's supposed to play the Panthers tonight, and hopefully that's able to go ahead depending on what happens with the weather. And obviously the Panthers will put their Stanley Cup banner up. They've got their new rings splashed around on social media. So I'm just pumped for the start of the year. It's not just for one game or one team or anything in particular.
I'm excited for the Sens season, obviously, considering I'll be covering them. They will host the Panthers in their first game on Thursday. Carter Yakemchuk, just really quickly here. 19 years old, turning heads at camp. He gets sent back to the WHL. I think it's the right move, but man, like, he really made it tough on Sens brass leading into Monday. Just talking to Travis Green yesterday about it, he emphasized the fact that it was a pretty tough decision to have to send him back to junior. Yeah, it would have been a really cool story if he somehow made the team, though, at 19. But if it was looking as if he was just going to be this in and out player in the lineup, it's not the best for him. But man, I liked him in camp. He's surprised me a lot from when he got drafted to now. He's really surprised me and surprised a lot of people in that Senators front office as well.
It's funny. This isn't just specific to Yakemchuk, but like, part of me would like to see teams give players in that situation a couple games. And I know it can be tough, but even if in the back of your mind, like, he's likely not here for the season, like, I think there's value in keeping a player around, even just to practice for a couple weeks, give him a few games. There's even the option. I remember LA did this with Brant Clark a few years ago, but if you end up scratching a player for 5 games, you can send him to the AHL on a conditioning stint for 2 weeks. So there's a way to sort of stretch out his time in pro hockey, even knowing, again, that you're going to send him back likely. And, I don't know enough about the Yakemchuk situation specifically, so it's not a comment on him only, but, I thought at one point, had Easton Cowan made more of a noise with the Leafs, I wondered if they try to do that. Now, the cap for the Leafs would have made that tough because it's hard for them to keep a player around who really, they don't have the room to keep a player around who isn't going to play or isn't going to play regularly. But, basically we're seeing big change now in the NCAA, allowing major junior players going there. Like, I think it's time for there to be a change in some way to make it easier. I don't know where the slackening could be, but I'd just like to see more players in Yakemchuk's shoes just get a few games. Like, I think there's value to it. I mean, you might say, Fraser Minton last year played 3 games for the Maple Leafs. He went back to WHL from that point. Like I still think he shows up a little bit more feeling part of the team, just knowing what this is. Like, I think there's value there, but there's all kinds of limitations in the rules for it. But yeah, I mean, I noticed Yakemchuk, he started off, he played that first preseason game actually in Toronto, and, was part of basically that point, the non-Sens game group. And then as time went along, he had established himself. I think Ottawa has some some room to improve on the blue line. So there was arguably a spot for him to jump in there. But that being said, very few defensemen in this day and age play in the league as teenagers. It's just the reality. Obviously, the guys picked right at the top of the draft tend to, but even then, it takes some time before you're ready, typically.
I was trying to think, like, how many defensemen at 19 have made that jump? It's one thing if you're a forward at 19, but I was trying to think yesterday, how many 19-year-old defensemen have been able to make that jump? It can't be that large of a number.
No, did Erik Karlsson, I think he played in his 19-year-old season, if I'm not mistaken, like the first year he was drafted. But then even then, I actually remember once I was covering a game at what was in the Arcana Center, and Erik Karlsson was a healthy scratch, and he was sitting behind me in the press box, like just the way they had the scratches. And I remember seeing him, and I didn't know a lot about him at that time, which is, kind of funny given how significant of a player he ended up being in his era. But he looked like, I was like, this guy looks like a pianist. Like he was so skinny. He was so small at that time. It was just hard to imagine because, obviously it's a physical sport against pretty large opponents who are out there to make your life difficult. But anyway, I might be wrong. It might have been his age 20 season, but I think he might have played at 19. Obviously a few players have done it over time, but largely.
Jay Bouwmeester comes to mind.
Sure. Did Derek Johnson? I know he got injured. He was drafted first overall by St. Louis. He got injured, I think, as a rookie, but then might have played his next year. It happens, but it's tough to do. How old's Lane Hutson? We just talked about him. I know he was drafted 20, a couple years ago. He's 20. So we're talking about this guy's a miracle. He's 20 and he's 160 pounds. He's going to play in the league. But the truth is just, it takes, how old was Moritz Seider? Did he get in there as a teenager? Probably. I think he was
I could
sixth
double
overall
check that.
pick.
I don't remember.
Anyway, yeah. Sorry. We're now it's just you and I just blindly taking stabs, but they're obviously
fact
the
checking.
Good news is, I was going to say, the good news is I'm going to look at my Twitter feed in a couple hours and there's just going to have people just giving me answers. Like, how didn't you think of this guy? Partly because it's an early morning for Julian and I, and I'm still on my first coffee. So my brain isn't fully tuned up yet.
I haven't had any. Moritz Seider began in his age 20 season with the Detroit Red Wings. We've gone through a lot of the September sweethearts and training camp roster moves. Let's get to one final piece of business before I ask you some season preview questions. And also, you
got that glint in your eye. I'm scared about what comes next.
For those who sent in Ask CJ questions, we're going to get to them on Thursday. Just better for how the show is going to go out today, for us to just kind of get to more Ask CJ questions at the end of the week. This episode of the Chris Johnston Show is brought to you by Mint Mobile. You know when you discover a new binge-worthy show or a song that you bump on repeat and you just have to share it with your friends so they can experience how awesome it is? That's kind of what it feels like when you discover that Mint Mobile offers premium wireless for $15 a month when you purchase a 3-month plan. It's such an awesome deal, there's no way you can keep it to yourself. By the way, friends don't let friends overpay for wireless. Say bye-bye to your overpriced wireless plan and switch to Mint Mobile. Mint Mobile is here to rescue you and your squad with premium wireless plans starting at $15 a month. All plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. Use your own phone with any Mint Mobile plan and bring your own phone number along with all of your existing contacts and ditch overpriced wireless with Mint Mobile's deal and get 3 months of premium wireless service for $15 a month. To get this new customer offer and your new 3-month wireless plan for $15 a month, go to mintmobile.com/Johnston. $45 upfront payment required, equivalent to about $15 a month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited plan. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details. Anyway, the one story I want to bring up, that is a roster move. Jeremy Swayman signing with the Boston Bruins. The long national nightmare for Bruins fans is over. I know a lot of Leafs fans took pleasure in the Bruins kind of sweating a little bit with that. That's over for them too. Jeremy Swayman, 8 years, $64 million. What do you think of the end of that?
$66 million.
Oh crap! Let me. I gotta do that again. I can't have that mistake.
No, you don't. No, it's okay.
No,
it's more. It's just more because it's in
sorry.
my head because Cam Neely said he had 64 million reasons to go to camp, and then I'm like, well, but Swayman says I got 66 million.
Okay, hold on. Jeremy Swayman, 8 years, $66 million. Even the best ones mess up.
Well, I think it's I'll tell you this: it's a sensible conclusion to what was, a pretty emotional negotiation. The fact that it was signed on Sunday, as listeners of the CJ Show will know, there had been no pain inflicted on either side until Monday, and so the fact they got it done Sunday, I don't think is a coincidence. It's funny. I was on Overdrive in Toronto, the drive time show, and they were saying that they thought this was a loss for Swayman. It's hard to call anything a win-loss, but I think it's a win for a player who, fought for what he believed in, stuck to his guns, ended up getting them above that $64 million number that the president of the team, Cam Neely, floated publicly. He didn't miss a day of pay. He got an 8-year secured deal, even though he's never been a full-time number one, played, lots of games. Now, obviously there's a universe from here where Swayman becomes just a bona fide stud number one. Like, I think that he's on that kind of path. Obviously the Bruins think so too with the contract they gave him. And maybe this looks like a bargain in a few years. It's possible, but it's also possible that Jeremy Swayman has injury issues or performance issues or things that maybe interrupt his career and make things, where it's not just a straight line to stardom. And if that happens, obviously he's secured a nice future for his family. I liked some of the social media content. I don't know if you didn't get a chance to see it, but like the Bruins put him out there, like driving into practice and bringing his bag into the rink. And, I don't think, even as public as it was, even as clearly emotional as it was, I don't think there'll be bad blood there, but there's no getting around the fact there's now a considerable amount of pressure on Jeremy Swayman's shoulders. Probably is anyway on a number one goalie, but this guy missed camp, was skating at Boston University, trying to do what he could to keep up, but that's obviously a step or two down from being part of an NHL training camp and playing exhibition game against NHL players. And now he's got this contract, and if he doesn't stop the puck, it's going to be a storyline in Boston, right? There's going to be discussion about this. There's going to be people referencing what happened in September. And so that's part of the deal here. But from a strict business standpoint, I think he's pushed the bar up for guys like Jake Ottinger or Stuart Skinner or other goaltenders kind of a similar age that are going to go into their next contract negotiation and say, hey, that 8.25 million times 8 looks like about what I'm worth. And so, in the end of the day, I think Swayman achieved what he wanted to achieve. I'm sure he feels he might have left a little bit of money out there, but he also stretched the team pretty far, and he did so, most importantly, without missing days of the season. This is the truth for every negotiation. We'll discuss this again with some other player next September, October, I bet, Julian. The system is stacked against a player. If you miss days of the season in a contract dispute, whatever you want to call it, you're going to lose money you can never earn back. Swayman was going to give up $43,000 a day by missing even one day, or 2 days would be 86, 3 days, 129. So, that's a lot of money in the real world, and it's hard to ever get that back in any way. So, I think that this was the right ending. I do think they're going to make good. And now really the focus for me is just like, how quickly does he get up to speed? How good is he? Is he ready to handle the spotlight that's going to be even a little bit brighter on him because of everything that went on in his contract negotiation?
8 years, $66 million for Jeremy Swayman. That number's going to bug me all for the rest of the recording. Once we get out of here, I'll be fine.
Man, you got to take it one shift at a time, one segment at a time. You just got to put that behind you. We can't change the past.
I really appreciate your words of reassurance, CJ. You made me feel a lot better after that number.
I do know this of who makes the most mistakes on this show. It would be me. So you've got a lot of forgiveness for me.
Okay. Well, we don't have a counter here for that, so we will never know the answer to that question. Speaking of questions, are you ready to answer some questions when it comes to a season preview? You're right. A lot of these season previews around the league are the same. Who's going to win this division? Who's going to win this award? I just have a list of questions and possibilities, and I'm wondering what you think will happen. How does that sound? Is that at least a little bit different from what you would normally hear?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm not bagging on you. I mean, look, there's only so many
I know you're
ways
not bagging on me.
There's only so many ways to look at we're holding the globe up and we're spinning around and trying to see it from a different angle. But I mean, there's only so many ways to see it.
Yeah. If you were bagging on me, I think you would have crucified me for the Swayman mistake. I know you're not.
Come on.
Okay. So yeah, here's a few questions about the upcoming season I would love to know your answers to. First one, which storyline are you most looking forward to covering around the league?
It's got to be the Oilers. I just think that this is the most compelling team by a long shot this season, given the way last year ended, given everything we've seen on the Face-Off show, which I know we've covered extensively, given that they have two of the world's best players, but certainly the number one player in Connor McDavid and what he's gone through, given an off season. I mean, they changed general managers. They made changes in their front office. They brought in some veteran players and got a lot of flowers for them, but does that work out? I see Jeff Skinner's already down on the third line there after what seemed like a slow preseason. They got Victor Robertson around. I think that's a team for sure. We're going to be talking about adding a defenseman in year. The feeling their blue line isn't up to snuff. Can Darnell Nurse bounce back and maybe, give a performance that's a little closer to what he's paid? Because I think that's probably the most inefficient contract on their books now that they've moved on from Jack Campbell in the offseason. I just think that the stakes couldn't be higher for Edmonton. I mean, lots of teams might say cup or bust. I mean, it's clearly cup or bust there, coming within one goal. And for me, that's like the storyline that has me most interested. Maybe it's because it's where we left off a little bit, right? I mean, I was obviously covered Game 7 of the Cup final. Like that's, if you see one season to the next is a continuation of a story, I'm just curious to see if they can get back there and what they go through. Do they have a lull to start the year? The Oilers to me it's like the days of our lives. Like I think it's got the potential to be soap opera-y. Look at it. They might just be focused machines and they might just rip through the league. Like I'm not saying it's definitely going to become soap opera-y, but I think the stakes are massive there. And the truth is they got to get the job done. I mean, Connor McDavid is this season and next under contract. He's more likely than not to stay. His good buddy Leon Draisaitl signed on long term, but that's not guaranteed as of this moment. So I just think you throw all those components into a stew, and that's a pretty tasty stew.
Stew sounds really good right now. The one question I have about the Oilers is this. I've seen teams in the past who go through a grueling Stanley Cup final run, and there's a letdown. Where not for every team, like the Florida Panthers are clearly an example of a team that's been able to get through that, but there clearly is some kind of letdown with a bunch of teams who go through that run, in particular when they lose, and the next season it's just they're trying to get up from that. For the Oilers in this case, this season ran as long as it's ever been, and they had a short off season, and now they go out and play. I just wonder if that plays a role in how their season goes this year. I'm not saying they can't get back to the Stanley Cup final. I'm just wondering if, let's say the Oilers come out to a so-so start this season. Like, we're going to point to the fact that they had a short off season, right? Like, I sort of anticipate that. I think if they have a banner season, that's going to stun me more than anything else.
Really, I'll say this. This is the prediction part of our show. This is how I see that going. Because you're right. Some teams get there and then it's like they can never get back to that level. But I think some teams get there and they know it's their one shot. Like some teams get there and maybe their core players are at a certain age and they just don't know if they're going to get there again. Or maybe the salary cap does something to their roster that makes it so much harder to get back. Like I think Edmonton, like the best players on that team are still right in the prime of their careers. Like I think it's more than likely to be just another little source of fuel. Not saying they needed it, but man, I don't think it's going to hurt that they got that close. In that face-off show, you see Matthew Tkachuk hugging, I think it was Sergei Bobrovsky after they won the Eastern Conference title. And he's like, I told you we'd be back. I told you we'd be back. Like, I bet that Edmonton is going to I just think they're going to be that kind of team. And the truth is, they went through everything you could go through last year, but winning. Like with how often they were down and out and got off the mat. So that's why I entered this year confident that, yeah, if it's a so-so October, if they're like 4-5-1 after the first 10 games, I just think that they're going to still have a self-belief that won't waver, that they can be the team they always, were designed to be. So, it's only a prediction. I don't have all the answers, unfortunately. Actually, I'm glad I don't have the answers. It wouldn't be as fun to watch if you knew what was going to happen.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
My sense is when I call them the biggest story of the year, for me, my sense is they're going to be on a mission, and I think it's going to be something to watch. Like, I think it's going to be just fascinating. And then you get to the playoffs, and sometimes the best team in the league doesn't win, right? And that's they've got to somehow navigate that gauntlet of 4 best of 7s if they're going to actually get their hands on that thing.
So I'll say this. I still have the Oilers as a playoff team, but I will say they are not my pick to come out of the Western Conference to make it to the Stanley Cup final. Do you have the Edmonton Oilers returning to the Stanley Cup final? That's an actual question I have on my list.
I have them returning, and I have them winning it. And you might recall I did call them last year, which looked terrible in November and looked a lot better in late June until they didn't win. But I did pick Edmonton to win last year, and I'm sticking with it. I just think that they are the best, deepest team with the best player on earth, and that's a pretty good mix to have entering a year. Do you have them winning the Pacific at least, or are you predicting just a middling season where they just can't quite put everything together and they do it the hard way?
I don't think they need to win the division. Like,
they don't, but I'm just curious because you're predicting them not to get out of the West, which is fine. But are you forecasting a year where just, again, if they finish second in the division, doesn't mean it's a bad year.
Yeah, that's fine. That's more than fine. I think they're at this point where, like, if they finish second or third in that division, no one's going to get mad at them for getting to that point. We all know it's cup or bust for that team. I think if anything, they're in that second or third just because, again, they might go out to a start that's not perfect, and it's going to take them time to get back. Plus, they already went through last year where they went through a horrific start and they did a complete 180 to get to the playoffs. They've gone through worse. So literally, if it gets to that point, it's not going to be the end of the world for them. Do they win the Pacific
They're almost
division?
in Tampa territory of a few years ago where it was just like, if the Lightning got in, you were like, you don't care if they're starting on the road, which they did the one year they won the cup. Like it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who the matchups don't matter. It's like, as long as that team has a chance to play for the cup, they're one of the most likely to win it.
Man, this is actually a tough question because Vancouver would be
Vegas,
a candidate,
maybe?
but Vegas maybe, but like Vegas is also in that situation too, where they also don't need to win it. But like those 3 teams, Vegas, Edmonton, Vancouver, like they all are playoff teams in that division for me. I guess there is a world where Edmonton could still win it. I guess it's just, all I'm just trying to say is that I'm not expecting them to win the President's Trophy. I'm not, like, if they find a way to do that, then that's going to surprise me.
I'm expecting them to win everything. I'm expecting like a year where it's just the right place at the right time. And like, I think like Connor McDavid's winning the Hart. I think the Oilers are winning the President's Trophy. I think they're winning the Cup. Like, I just think it's just like a rampage year for this team. But
man, if their season ended a little earlier, I'd be all on board with that. It's just, it would be insane for them to go on that run, considering they've had barely 2 months off.
Did you read, by the way, Dan Robson's story at The Athletic, our colleague?
Incredible story.
Great story.
On
He basically, for anyone who missed it,
that.
I just want to shout out Dan, and I'm sure Julian feels the same way, our colleague. But he had some basically detailed, like, sort of Connor McDavid summer from when he lost to now. And his bachelor party was supposed to start 2 days after Game 7 in Europe. And they were going to go to the UEFA tournament and see a concert in London. Anyway, that ended up getting scrapped, obviously, with how long the season went. They went down to the Bahamas. Obviously, we know Connor got married this summer. But you're right. It was, not only was it a short time to recuperate, but it was also a busy summer in Connor's life. But I don't know. I just think.
Great story.
Anyway, great story. I'm still predicting rampage year for the Oilers.
Hey, you know what? If it happens, we'll go back to this episode. And if it happens, for the sake of the soap opera, it's a great storyline that we're all going to follow. And in you going all in on the Oilers, you answered a handful of my questions, including who's your pick to win the Hart Trophy. And I did have, now that you have your cup pick in, I mean, that basically takes care of that with the Edmonton Oilers. Love it. There are a few other questions on my list I do want to get to. Is this the season Alexander Ovechkin breaks Wayne Gretzky's record for most goals scored?
I don't think he can get there quite. 42 goals? 39 years old?
41 to tie it, 42 to break it.
I mean, obviously, if anyone can do it, it would be Ovechkin, but I don't think he gets there this year. I'll tell you what I kind of hope for, just for the drama. I hope he has a big October. Like, I think it'll be interesting if he has a really strong start and it seems possible. Because this is the rare story, I think, in the NHL that can kind of go beyond hockey, conversation. Like, I think as he gets closer,
it already has.
Yeah. But I think like when he gets within 10 or whatever, whatever show you're watching, whether it's SportsCenter or what have you down in the States, like, I just think it will be tracked and followed and it will, it's sort of like if you weren't Julian, this is a dated reference for a youngin' like you, but in the summer of 98, you didn't have to be a baseball fan and you're following Sammy Sosa and Mark McGuire, chasing Roger Maris's home run chase. And literally, like, at that time, a different world, but they were cutting in live just for those players at bats if you're watching other shows. Because like that was a level of interest. I think it's going to be similar to that. Doesn't obviously work. Don't just drop a Washington Capitals power play, into something else. But I mean, it'll be quite something. I don't think he gets there though. That's my. I mean, come on. I'm actually taking the safe side of the bet. That the odds of a 39-year-old scoring 42 goals are pretty long.
That's fair. That's fair. I'll say. I agree with you. I think you'll get close, and then maybe next year is the year he does it. But it would be something if he found a way to get to that level this year. And hey, we were starting to doubt Alexander Ovechkin partway through last year, and then he ended the year on a pretty good note. With good reason, obviously. But he ended the season pretty well. He had the worst stretch of his entire NHL career in terms of, I don't have the exact number in front of me, but I do remember writing a story about it. It was by far the longest stretch with the fewest goals he'd ever played in the NHL. He was changing sticks. He went to Dubai on his bye week. Like, he was riding camels looking for it. I mean, I'm just kidding around with that part, but he was searching for something. And then he scored like 8 goals in 8 games in February. And he ended up with a total somewhere where what you'd expect. Okay. Next one for you. Do any of these 4 teams make the playoffs this year? Buffalo, Detroit, Ottawa, and Montreal.
Yes. I think.
Which one?
I'm gonna ride with the Sens on this one. I think that the Sens will be a wild card team from that group. Believe it or not, my number 2, if I had to identify it, would be Buffalo. And I know that they just started 0-2 in Czechia, and it's like the ghosts of the last 13 seasons are rattling around everyone's brains in Western New York. But I think Ottawa and Buffalo are the most likely of the two to grab it. And as I said, I'll pick the Sens to take a wild card spot. Okay.
I also have the Sens as a playoff team this year, also in the wild card. Something about the Metro tells me that I don't think there's going to be it might be a little weak this year after the top 3 teams. So I think there's an opportunity for Ottawa.
So who you got? You got, I'm sure, the Devils, the Rangers, and the Hurricanes as your top 3?
Yeah. That would be my top 3. Not necessarily in that. Yeah, we can figure out the order later, but yeah, those 3 teams.
But that's what you're thinking is the main 3 in the Metro. So then the kind of teams with ambition that you're doubting a little bit, like the Islanders probably still have some ambition.
They absolutely do. And I would think
obviously the Capitals and the Penguins.
Not sold on those 2 teams making the playoffs this year.
Right. Capitals had a kind of an intriguing offseason for me.
I know you've been very interested in that offseason. I'm not as sold on the Caps.
I mean, I think because people look at it as like, what's the plan there? It's like, well, the plan's evident. They're trying to be as good as they can be right now. And they don't want to have pain for it, right? Like, they don't want to go to the bottom of the standings. So that's why I find it interesting. Because because so many teams in league, and I'm not, this is just what it is. So many teams are either really good or rebuilding, right? And it's just interesting to see others try it a different way. I always kind of respected that Boston never truly rebuilt in this era. Like they just kept going and going and going and sort of doing it on the fly. And that's really tough to do. So the Caps are at least trying to do that. I'm not saying they'll be able to do it. Snuck into the playoffs last year. We'll see.
The Utah Hockey Club. Oh, all good. I've done that a lot, so you can get a pass on this one.
I don't know. I'm already fighting a cold. It's only October. What's going on?
It's flu season, man. It's flu season, man. I'm just getting through one thing myself. The Utah Hockey Club, are they a playoff team?
Ooh. Yes. I think the excitement of being somewhere new. I think that if you look at the Coyote season last year, and obviously this is the former Coyotes, like other than that stretch where I think they lost 13 games in a row or something, right around the time all the news started. Like, I know any team, I guess you could play this game. Like, other than that one stretch where they were the absolute worst team in the league, they were pretty good. So I'm viewing that as like an outlier with their situation where the weight of everything going on around them crushed them. I like the young players on their team. I like what they did, getting really serious about building out their blue line. I think the excitement of being in a new market like that, I think it's just going to energize everybody. I'm picking Utah again, wild card spot. I don't think they're going to be challenging for division titles or anything like that, but I could see them being one of the really sort of charming stories of the season. Getting freed from the tent in Tempe where they had to walk through a tented area from their dressing room.
I remember
into their
so
college
ridiculous.
rink. I just think getting, and I realize the facilities are actually a bit makeshift in Utah because of how quickly this came together. But I think that's a team. I've got them as one of my surprise teams entering the year.
I like that pick. What about the Toronto Maple Leafs? Where do the Leafs finish in the Atlantic, and how far do they go in the playoffs?
I think they win the Atlantic Division. It's something they've never done. For all the regular season success the Leafs have had in the last 7-8 years, they won the North Division back in that weird realigned season in COVID times. But other than that, they haven't won the Atlantic. I think that they're most incentivized to do so in a sense. Obviously teams like Boston, Florida, Tampa, I think that they're really veteran. I mean, the Leafs are a pretty veteran team now too, frankly, but they've kind of been there, done that. For them, it's about getting to the dance. I think under a new coach, and trying to maximize their opportunities. I also think the Leafs are deeper. I mean, I mentioned the forward group when we did Leafs Corner. Even defensively, I like their offseason. In a couple of years, some of those contracts might not look great, just long-term deals for players in their 30s. But right now, I think they're in a position to compete at a level greater than they were last year. And so I think they win the division. I got no idea what happens in the playoffs, though. I mean, there is an element with this team that is hard to ignore. I mean, that it doesn't matter how good the team is. Like they haven't lost all those playoff series because they were the worst team, right? They've lost a lot of those playoff series because their key performers didn't, game break for them. I don't know if it's the pressure or what's in their minds. So like, even if I forecast them having a great regular season, which I do, I don't know what'll happen when we get there again. Like there's the Toronto Star, I can't remember exactly how they quantified it, but like no team has had the regular season success the Leafs have had with no playoff success. Like it has never happened in NHL history. The Leafs have like the fourth or third most points in like the last 5 regular seasons, and they have 1 playoff series win. So I don't know if they're breaking curses or streaks or whatever this year, but I do think they're going to have a great regular season.
And we'll be there for it. One more. Just give me one more before we wrap up here. Edmonton versus who in the Stanley Cup final?
Toronto. I'm kidding. I just said I don't know what the Leafs are going to do in the playoffs. I was looking for a laugh there. I wanted to give you a decisive Toronto after saying I don't know what's going to happen.
That was so funny.
How about I go wild card and I'll say Edmonton, New Jersey, Stanley Cup final.
Ooh, interesting. I have Dallas, New York. I have Dallas, New York Rangers as a Stanley Cup final this year. For what it's worth.
I would sign up for that.
I would sign up for that in a heartbeat. You went through the preview unscathed. We'll see about your Edmonton Toronto joke, though. That was good. It's not really a joke. I mean, I get what you're trying to do. As I mentioned earlier, Ask CJ. We'll do it on Thursday later this week. We'll have more time to get to all the questions. So thank you to everyone who sent them in so far. And enjoy the start of everyone else's regular season beyond Buffalo and New Jersey. Obviously, it's going to be a lot of fun. Hopefully, this prediction segment gave you something to think about. It gave me a lot to think about, especially with how hard CJ's going in on the Edmonton Oilers.
Yeah, that's probably the biggest pick that I made with, whatever. I'm predicting just a savage year for them, like start to finish dominance. Let's see if I'm right.
Let's see if you're right. We'll be back later this week.
The Chris Johnston Show. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris and follow Julian @JKA McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.